sounds great. All right, Scott, I think, Brent, why don't we get the show on the road and we'll start the event. Aloha and welcome to all members and guests to the Honolulu Japanese Chamber of Commerce first ever Sip, Learn, and Support virtual wine event. This is a true collaboration of several organizations that will take you from the vineyard to the wine in your own mouth. My name is Mark Milton. My wife, Teresa, and I started our Hawaii-based wine and spirits, beverage marketing and more brokerage company 30 years ago in Hawaii in 1990. We have proudly represented the Carroll family estates, world-class wine and spirits in Hawaii for the past 16 years. Today's Zoom event will be led by two key executives from Carroll, including Brent Anderson, who will lead our Zoom call, and Scott Stubbs, who will be our moderator. The four world-class Carroll winemakers, Charles Beeler, Bruce Nyers, McLean Atkinson, and Derek Rolfe will share their expertise in winemaking techniques with everyone. We want to thank our two Hawaii distributors, Young's Market, led by Hugh Duncan, and Southern Glacier Wine and Spirits, led by Warren Sean, for getting our Carroll wines into quality distribution in the Hawaii restaurants, hotels, and retail stores. We also want to thank Jason Fuketa and Fujioka's for all their support of the Honolulu Japanese Chamber of Commerce and their support of the various Carroll estate wines. Just a few housekeeping items for today's event. The event today will be recorded for later replay. Everyone should be muted except for the speakers, and please turn off your video if you're not speaking. Also, please send your questions to the winemakers through the chat bar. The last and the most important part of our Zoom call today is you. Okay. Without our wines being purchased, consumed, and enjoyed by you and your friends, we cannot be successful. We thank you for purchasing the various Carroll wines of Fujioka's in advance of today's Zoom winemakers event. We hope that you will enjoy this experience. With that said, I want to introduce the chair of the Honolulu Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Jason Ito.
Hey, thank you for those great comments, Mark, and thanks for especially pointing out the different partnerships that brought this together. Good afternoon, everyone. We have a really nice turnout today of over 75 members and guests. So if you are with 3 others today, we actually have more than 300 people participating in this virtual Sip, Learn, and Support event. I'd like to thank and recognize Mr. Mark Nakamoto, chair of the Chopsticks and Wine series, for his leadership and creativity in bringing this event together for us. Mark and his committee have worked tirelessly to make sure that all of you have a fabulous time today. And if you're not a current member of the Japanese Chamber, please consider joining us as we celebrate our 120th anniversary this year. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator, Mr. Scott Stubbs. He's a Michigan native and a graduate of the University of Michigan. I guess I should say go Wolverines. Scott started his 31-year career in the restaurant business and through it, developed a sincere passion for wine. And his passion has taken him from Tabor Hill Winery, featuring the premier Palace Brands portfolio, to Ollinger Distributing in Indiana. And finally, in 1993, to the Trinchero family estates. Currently, Scott, along with Carlo Trinchero, are developing a specialty portfolio of family-run wineries who specialize in small production wine with a distinct sense of place. Scott enjoys traveling the world and meeting these amazing families. In 2012, Scott almost got to Oahu, but instead vacationed in Maui with his family. After enjoying the luau and some ukulele classes, Scott's son, William, 16 at that time, was excited to tell his golf teammates that he was to play at the 2012 #1 golf course in Hawaii, Kapalua Plantation Golf Course, home of the Tournament of Champions. Unfortunately, the tournament was scheduled for the same week they arrived and their tee time was double booked. William was heartbroken, but Scott, as a true pro, found out that Kapalulu's golf pro had just arrived from the Fortress Golf Club in Michigan, where Scott's best friend had just become the pro there. This relationship resulted in Scott and William playing the Kapalua Bay course with PGA pro Nick Watney's dad and his caddy. So William had a wonderful time, picked up a few golf tips, and spent the next day walking the tournament with the Watney family. What a silver lining to what could have been. With today's COVID-19 situation, our silver lining has been the opportunity for us to enjoy this virtual wine event. As a true fine wine professional with an abundance of knowledge, we are thrilled to have Scott moderate our event along with our all-star cast of winemakers. So please enjoy yourselves today. Here's Scott. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jason. I couldn't ask for a better introduction for that. I'm very thankful this is being recorded so I can share it with my mother to let her know that, in fact, apparently I did amount to something. Thank you and welcome. I can't begin to tell you how exciting this is for us to have the opportunity to share wine with you today. I've been with Trent, as Jason said, for 27 years. And my goal today is to tell you just a tiny bit about the family behind this story. And from there, what our mission is. And then, and without exception, I'm going to introduce you to 4 people who mentor me and show a passion and an energy and a singularness of bringing great wines of place every day. So that's our mission today. Really, in a nutshell, I'd like you to know a little bit about the Carroll family. It's an amazing story. Mario and Mary Carroll met in New York after Mario had come across through Ellis Island. And they had a little bit of a prosperous life in New York, nothing special. And one day, one of their family members, and they're from the Piedmont region of Italy, decides that he really wanted to get back into grape growing. He takes the train out to Napa, sends a letter back to his brother, Mario Carroll, and in effect says, hey, New York's nowhere to raise kids. You should move out to Napa. This reminds me of home. So Mario and Mary packed up 3 small children, took the train across, and arrived when Napa was probably, according to Bob, more walnuts and cattle than it was grapes. But through the years, they slowly, through their passion and their history, built a successful business. Bob in the late 60s became famous for making these amazing Zinfandels at the time where Napa was really waking up with families like the Heitzes and the Mondavis. And Bob got this reputation for old vine Zinfandels, and people would come up from San Francisco. And as he slowly built the family business, they became commercially successful. And when Bob was in his late 70s, he sat down with me and Mario, and we were sitting there talking, with Carlo. And we were talking, and Bob mentioned this whole history and how he remembers going to his father and saying, Dad, if we're really going to make this a family business that works, we have to quit trying to sell, these jug wines at the tasting room in the late 60s. We have to make wines of place. And so we talked about it. So the Heritage Collection that you see on the above you is kind of this full circle mission for me, Carlo, our president, and everybody, all our partners that are on this phone today. I really want to leave, and I know we all want to leave a legacy with the family because this was their mission, and they had the courage to bring this thing full circle. So that's the family behind this. If you ever get to Napa, right now is not the time, but it's a beautiful winery, and this family puts more contributions into the community of anybody I know. So it's just an amazing story. So please come out and visit us when things settle. So with that said, Brian, if you'll flip the first slide. And Jason kind of touched on it. He and I talked a little bit. The whole mission here is 4 things. Here's where our pillars, and we let it down. We want to work almost exclusively with family-run wineries unless there's a reason not to. But not only are they family-run wineries, but they're wineries that the family's involved. Not just money behind it. We want this to be their passion. Second thing, we want wines of place. We want you to stick your nose in the glass, taste the wine, and we want your mind to go to either a specific region or a meal you've had that was special. Number 3, we want a real story behind it. We're not interested in trying to build this through marketing. We want, just like if you heard Bruce and you heard Charles talk about Lulu, with the passion they spoke, that's what we want. And we hope that comes across today. And as important as anything, we're going to try to partner with families who share our passion for giving back to the environment, making wines of place, and that really sense of passion that the families have to link up together. So with that said, I'm in the company, you go ahead, Brent. I'm in the company of 4 great winemakers. So I'm certainly not going to pretend to have their knowledge, but I'm really excited to present a couple of wines to you today to kind of kick this thing off. So the first one's Prosecco, a VC Prosecco. And what do the first thing we think of when we think of Prosecco? Well, first of all, you're about 15 miles from Venice. Venice is a great city of culture. It's a great city of architecture, art, and really the kind of the foundation for the great glassware, if you're familiar with Murano glass. So it's a great city. Within that, when you think of Prosecco, I think most people think of something that's kind of new, something that's just kind of come onto the scene, and it has in its own way. But if you look at this little town of Prosecco, they were making wines back in Roman times. So it's really an older area. But what's happened is as time goes on, it's kind of caught fire a little bit as an alternative to champagne. So I thought I would start with the fact that let's say what Prosecco is, and let's kind of compare it a little bit to champagne, just so you've got a little background a little bit. Prosecco comes from a delimited region in Italy. It's called a DOC. If you're within a DOC in Italy, the first thing you're going to know is they set the rules from harvest to the grapes that you're allowed to use, okay, to how much you're allowed to harvest. It's really kind of a delimited area. Well, what they found is Prosecco got bigger, that within this region, other people outside, because Prosecco was considered the grape, and it still is, but they took this grape, and you could take, just like Chardonnay, you could make it in Australia, you could make it in the Ukraine. So what the Italians did in 2009 is they took Prosecco and they called that the region around the town of Prosecco. And then they turned around and went with the indigenous name of Glera as the grape. So Glera is the grape for Prosecco. And for such a fine and kind of festive wine that you think of as something you can kind of whack back in the summertime, the first thing you're going to note is it's actually a pretty tough grape to grow. It's thin-skinned. It has a tendency to crop big. And why is that important? It's about, and you're going to hear this, I'll bet you, from every winemaker behind me, is the importance of place and where these grapes are grown. Prosecco itself is a fairly large region. This is one of the few cooperatives, and it's a family-run cooperative that we work with, because each of the cooperatives are in about 8 different areas within the Prosecco region. Each one has a different expression of Prosecco. So what we do is, and this is where it gets between Prosecco and Champagne. Prosecco is a wine that's made from Glera. It can be made from other grapes, but the best ones are made from 100% Glera. The wine in your glass is 100% Glera. Like Champagne, it's fermented in the bottle. The difference is Champagne has a different series of grapes that are Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. So you have different grapes, and Champagne spends more times on what they're going to call the lees, which is the dead yeast cells, okay? And it imparts more flavors, kind of those toasty biscuit notes. We're not trying to do that with Glera. We're trying to do something bright, effusive, kind of effervescence. Proseccos are going to be lower pressures. It's about 45 PSI, whereas Champagne's 100. Also, Prosecco is fermented. There's secondary fermentation. So you've got the still wines in these 8 little regions across Italy. They bring those together. They put them in one tank and find their ideal blend. And then they do the secondary fermentation. Whereas Champagne, the secondary fermentation is within the bottle. So you get a lot of those yeasty, bready notes. We're trying to do white flowers, peaches, and something a little simpler and more enjoyable early. So with that said, if you get an opportunity to try Prosecco, you're going to find white flowers, peaches, stone fruits, and all those flavors that are, I think, that are so pertinent to now to have as an aperitif to get a party going. And that's what this is all about, getting this little party going. Okay, so if you get an opportunity, and if you like the Prosecco a little, you'll notice a lot of times there's just a little hint of bitterness to it. And there's this famous little cocktail in Venice called the Bellini, which is white peach juice, or white peach juice. You mix those two together, and if you don't like that, there's something I just can't help you out. Especially if you've had it in Venice at any time, it's probably as good a beverage as you'll have. So With that said, if you'll flip the page one for me, Brent. Okay. This tells you just a little bit of the background in terms of the winemaking piece of it. This winery is built primarily for on-premise initially. And when I call on-premise, I call wine shops like what Jason has similar, whereas there's somebody telling the story. It feels like somebody's at your table. So this is not a mass-produced wine. We bring in about 15,000 cases of it. It's done primarily in restaurants. So we're really excited to show this wine. 92 points in the tasting panel. And we hope you really get an opportunity to enjoy it as kind of a festive way to not only kick off the evening, but hopefully future evenings. And just as a quick snapshot, Brent, if you go up one, we're going to be bringing in a rosé. They've just made a ruling change in the DOC. You will now be able to do a Prosecco rosé. Before you could just call it a rosé. Our rosé is built on Pinot Noir and Merlot. And it's something that if you like rosé sparkling wines, it's a really pretty way to get the evening started. So if we can go to the next one, please. All right. I have to tell you, other than the 4 people on here, if I love telling one story, this is it. The gentleman up in your top left corner there is a gentleman named Randy Mason. Randy Mason has been making Sauvignon Blanc passionately in Napa Valley for 47 years. I don't know of anybody even close. So if I asked everybody on this presentation to say, pick the grape that you think of first when you think of Napa, I'm guaranteeing nobody's going to pick Sauvignon Blanc. So I said, when I met Randy initially, I said, Randy, either you're crazy about Sauvignon Blanc or just crazy. So here's a man that is so focused on Sauvignon Blanc that we're going to be, if you've been in Napa, there's a little town of Yountville. Just north of the town is a vineyard called Yount Mill. What you're going to have this evening is a single vineyard Sauvignon Blanc. But it's so specific that Randy's been working this same piece of land since 1984. He only makes his Sauvignon Blanc from the Yount Mill vineyard from an area that's what's called, there's the Yountville Hill on the valley floor. This hill traps the fog and gives him a cooler, longer fermentation time. So Sauvignon Blanc is a fairly vigorous grape. So if you give it an opportunity to give it fertile soils and lots of sunlight, it's off to the races. But grapevines, I always thought, are like bearing children. If you have too many, it's just hard to keep an eye on them all. So as the grapevine, if we can kind of keep those yields a little smaller and we can give them more time to mature on the vine, the better that fruit is. So Randy's very specific. He's on the behind this hill where traps the fog. When he harvests, he tries to get a blend of 60-40 of what he calls colored fruit versus more neutral color in fruit. He's trying to pick at exactly 22.5 bricks. That's his ideal. That's the grape sugar that goes into when you're making the wine to when you're actually harvesting. So why is that important? As global warming goes, if you're trapping that fog, you're keeping the grapes cooler. If you're also trapping that fog, you're helping to mitigate those big spikes. And we've got a little bit of global warming going on, as you can probably figure out at this point. And when the sun heats up and those grapes get hot really quick, they spike in sugars. And I always say spikes in sugars are like a 16-year-old grows 6 inches over the summer. He may look like a man, but he hasn't grown into that body. The goal is to let that grape slowly kind of mature along and get a little bit longer hang times. And that's what that positioning is doing for Randy. And that's a really important difference. So you're tasting a single vineyard Sauvignon Blanc from a particular block within a particular vineyard. So when Randy brings in the fruit, another really key spot, the way he's orientated the field, he is so specific that he's pulling leaves on the morning side. So these grapes primarily only see morning sun, which is the cooler side, and that evening sun isn't baking on it. He's looking for a very clear, clean expression of Sauvignon Blanc. Randy only works with clone 1. He does not work with it they call the Muscat clone, which is a little more of a floral clone. He really wants to get the green, he wants to really get the melon and the grapefruit pith kind of notes to it. He wants a very pure expression. He brings those grapes in for 40 years this guy's been working Sauvignon Blanc. So in effect, he's got it down to the point where he brings in the fruit, he puts it in cold fermenters, or cool ferments. And when I say cool ferments, most Sauvignon Blancs, in talking to Randy's, about a 10 to 15 day period. Randy's ferments on Sauvignon Blanc go 35 days. In my mind, I've always considered that like cooking a steak. You can sear it really quick, or you can make your grandmother's pot roast. And I've always found that some of those slower ferments have an opportunity to have all those deeper flavors. So a lot of times that you'll get in your grandmother's pot roast, quite frankly. So Randy brings that in. He has these long, cool ferments. With the cool ferments also, they kind of just bubbles along. You're not, as ferments get hotter, they'll like burn off some of those beautiful aromatics. He doesn't want that. He pulls that off, racks it off, puts it in tanks. About 20% of the Sauvignon Blanc stays a little time in lees. Lees are that we talked about with the sparkling wines, are those dead yeast cells that sit along the bottom, and it gives a little bit of a mid feel and a mid palate. If you're tasting that wine right now, I think what you'll find is it's really pretty on the middle, but or pretty on the tip of your tongue. But when it gets to the middle, it kind of, I call it sits down, and it sits there for a minute, and you get that mid palate and then on to the finish. And you just really don't get that at these kind of prices, to me, and a lot of Sauvignon Blancs anywhere, let alone Napa Valley. So he takes about 18% of those lees, puts it with about 20% of the juice, and from there he bottles it. And I would tell you that I think this is one of the prettiest expressions of Sauvignon Blanc in Napa Valley. It was 3 years ago, top 57, the Spectator Top 100 at 90. The last three vintages have been 90 and 90, 91, and this vintage is 92 that you're trying in the Spectator. And we fully expect that it will probably make the top 100 again, all at the price that you see today. So really, here's a guy that's passionate on every angle, from making the wine to making sure that it comes from the same plot of land year after year at a price that's pretty exciting for everybody to try. So with that said, Brent, you want to roll along for a second here? There's the fact sheets as we go. I apologize. I get talking. There's no stopping me. So if Brent, if you haven't anticipated by this time, all right. So if you roll up, well, I'm going to do the introductions for everybody. I will have to tell you the gentleman that you heard talking a little earlier, Bruce Nyers, I've been working with for about, I think we're going on year number 4, has become an instant mentor to me. I would argue that he spent the last 25 years working for the greatest importer of wines in the United States. I find his passion and his knowledge is just something to really, I really treasure. And as this is really personifies what we're trying to do with the Heritage Collection, is we're trying to find folks that this is what they do, and this is all they've really wanted to do for a long period of time, and this is all they are going to do. And the stories and the history, I just love that part about the wine industry, and I think that's what Bruce exemplifies. So Bruce, can you walk us through your Chardonnay today?
Absolutely, Scott. Thank you for the introduction. I also want to thank Mark Milton for generating this idea. Mark and I have had an opportunity to get acquainted over the past several years. I admire and respect him enormously. And I am delighted at this opportunity to talk to a group of people in Hawaii about our wines. I'm here in my office in St. Helena with my wife, Barbara, who is pictured in the upper left corner of those photographs that are on the screen. Barbara and I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, and after we graduated, I went in the Army and was initially assigned to South Korea, where I was a guided missile officer in the little village of Chuncheon near the demilitarized zone. I mention that because it was ironically in that situation that I was first exposed to French wine and became interested in it. I was later reassigned after 13 months in Korea to the Presidio of San Francisco. And Barbara and I arrived in San Francisco in the spring of 1970. And it was really the beginning, I'd like to think, of the wine and food movement, and we very much got caught up in the middle of it. I had been trained to be a chemist and worked as a chemist briefly, but got interested in wine and began working for a French wine importing company. And the old world wines of France have always kept my focus on that ideology ever since. Barbara, in the meantime, got interested in food, became a very talented cook, and eventually accepted a position with Alice Waters soon after she opened a restaurant in Berkeley called Chez Panisse. Barbara worked there as a line cook and a manager for the next 25 years. So the two of us were very much exposed to the world of California wine, the world of California food. And after a year working with the French wine importing company, I had an opportunity to move to the Napa Valley and go to work for a small winery and learn the craft of winemaking. And while I did that, I also went back to school at the University of California, Davis, through their very ambitious extension program then. And I got an opportunity to see the world of winemaking from those two aspects. The relatively scholarly academic approach of winemaking as a science by the University of California, Davis, and the more agrarian, if you will, aspect of winemaking as schooled and taught by the old world winemakers in France. After a couple of years working in the Napa Valley, I moved to Germany, and Barbara and I spent a year working at a winery in Germany, and then we moved to France, and I worked at a winery in France. I then returned from that experience and went to work for a guy named Joe Phelps, who was just starting a winery in the Napa Valley, and I worked with Mr. Phelps for 20 years. And in the course of that time, Barbara and I acquired a piece of land. You can see part of it behind us in that photo in the upper left. We planted the land to Merlot and to Cabernet Sauvignon, and we relied more on the old world techniques that we'd learned in Europe than the new world techniques that I'd learned at the University of California, Davis. And when we made our first wine in 1992 under the Nyers label, we relied on those old world techniques. And that's what you'll see here if you're tasting our Chardonnay. This is a Chardonnay that I think belies the idea of traditional California winemaking in a couple of ways. First of all, we don't use cultured yeast when we ferment the wine. We harvest these grapes by hand. We press the juice from the grapes. The juice goes into 60-gallon oak barrels. You see one of those in that photograph, the second from the left on the top. And the fermentation takes place naturally with native wild yeast. No additional yeast are added to it, no external yeast. Secondly, the wine undergoes a natural secondary malolactic fermentation. Again, we don't add any bacteria to force that fermentation to happen. We want it to occur naturally. And over time, we've grown quite comfortable with these traditional techniques. We ferment exclusively in barrels. Someone was visiting with us earlier this week, and they said, what do you do after you press the juice and put it in barrels? And my response is very simple and very direct. We walk away from it. The fermentation occurs naturally, relying on the native wild yeast that are trapped on the skins of the grapes during the growing process, during the growing season. And those yeast are there to conduct the fermentation when the grapes are harvested. Well, what does that do? You're well within your rights to ask that question. And frankly, We don't have a 100% answer to that. We're not entirely sure of all the things that happen to wine as a result of a native wild yeast fermentation. But we know the wine has a tendency to have more texture. We know that it has a tendency to have a broader range of aromas. And we know that those aromas have a tendency to be a little bit more wild, a little bit more, the French have a wonderful term for the wilderness that surrounds the vineyards throughout the country, and it's called garrigue. And the garrigue is a wonderful aroma that involves a lot of wild native plants. And the vineyards have a tendency to adopt some of those aromatic constituents, and they become part of the wine. So in short, what we do is we make natural wine at Nyers, and the Chardonnay is a perfect example of how we started. We have one more wine that we're going to be tasting after the Bieler Rosé, and we'll have an opportunity to talk more about our traditional winemaking approaches then. Scott?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bruce. The next gentleman that I'm going to introduce really kind of taught me something. When I thought of rosés, I loved them for the longest time, but I thought that as something, it was just something simple with pizza or as an aperitif. And I didn't realize the actual passion and seriousness that goes into it. And once I did, I really started recognizing these wines as rosés in general is something special. And Charles Bieler has really been championing great rosés way before there was ever this surge. And so to hear him talk about how to go about making a great rosé, and now that there's an ocean of it, it's such a treat to have somebody who's trying more of the traditional flavors and really trying to stay true to what a great rosé is all about. And he certainly is got my attention. I'm sure he's going to grab yours. So Charles, you got a minute to tell us about your rosé?
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so as my dad and I like to joke, this is an overnight success that took about 28 years. So from Bruce's place in Napa, we're going to go get in a car, drive to the San Francisco airport. We're going to get on a plane. We're going to fly over the North Pole. We're going to land in Paris. Maybe have a quick bite to eat in Paris. Bruce, I'm not sure if you have any recommendations, but I bet you do. And then we're going to get on the TGV and we're going to take the fast train down to the south of France to an area called Provence. My mom's American. My dad is actually Swiss. I had no interest in getting into the wine industry. But in '92, my dad bought a little property in the center of Provence. The appellation was called Coteaux Varois, the hills of the Var. And he proceeded to actually make some pretty interesting wine, but was struggling mightily, and asked me when I was in college to drop out and help him because he was struggling. And the wines were, well, the rosé was compelling. The reds were kind of charming, I think is the best way to put them. They had on a warmer year, they actually were quite delicious, but on an average year were not thrilling. But his rosés were really interesting. And of course, in Provence, even at that time, the majority of production of wine was rosé, but the rest of the world hadn't really learned about it. I didn't know any better. I was, 22, 23. And so I attacked and along the way I've met unbelievable people and I'm learning from winemakers, from people like Bruce and people like Scott and the Trent family and Joel Gott and Charles Smith and really sort of pouring that into everything we're doing. And in 2005, my dad's original property, which was called Chateau Routas, sold. My dad got an offer that he never thought he'd got, and we started making this particular wine, Bieler Prairie Fils. And the lessons from the first round with Routas was that the cool vintages actually made incredibly compelling rosé. They made rough red wine, but the high tone, the natural acidity, the tug of war, as I like to say, between a little bit of red fruit, kind of the raspberry, the strawberry, the watermelon on one side. On the other side, the herbal, salty, grassy, floral component, and on the other side, acidity. On the cooler vintages, there was just this incredibly taut dynamic in the wine that I just loved. And again, from a red wine point of view, not a great thing, but rosé, we loved it. And so when my dad sold the original property and we had an opportunity to do it again, the thinking was, let's find, and if we wanted to focus just on rosé, let's find where essentially the coolest growing area within Provence was. And that is in Aix-en-Provence on average. It's the highest elevation vineyards within Provence. And we pick on average several weeks later than the rest of the region. And for us to make this kind of style of high tension rosé was just perfect. And so over the years, so that first vintage was 2005. Over the years, we've been planting grapes actually that, of course there's Grenache, that's the lead, always has been a lot planted there. We've been planting a lot more Cinsault, which is a grape that's planted all over Côte de Provence, traditionally was not planted in much quantity in Aix-en-Provence. Brent, if you have that next photo, I think we have a picture of a mountaintop. You can just slide it down. Yeah. So, Aix-en-Provence is dominated by this big mountain that you see there called the Mont Saint-Victoire. All of our vineyards are right on the shoulder of the Mont Saint-Victoire. And again, it's really important. And the peak heat of the day, I would say, is fairly comparable to most of Côte de Provence, but the evenings are cooler. It takes longer to warm up. And we're just able to maintain this freshness and this verve that I think is just critical for sort of high tension, dynamic rosé. So again, grapes are Grenache. There is some Syrah. We've been planting more and more Cinsault, which is a big grape that tends to ripen later in the season, brings kind of a watermelon flavor. We've been planting a grape called Rolfe, which is also known as Vermentino. It's a white grape that adds, and legally, you have to co-ferment the white grape with the red grapes when you make rosé. You can't just make white wine and then dump it in. That's according to the appellation rules. But it adds kind of a floral, spicy component and adds a little richness on the palate. And yeah, we've been reconfiguring the vineyards to really just try to push back ripening. We don't want, we want the fruit to hang a long time and have low sugar and low alcohol, essentially. Not particularly low alcohol. But we don't want to be over about 13%. But we want to pick when there's optimal ripeness. We do close to 40 different fermentations. I'm actually, like Bruce, he spoke a lot about spontaneous fermentation, native yeast, and I'm a big fan of that and use it a lot on many of my reds. We've actually found when making rosé, if we're breaking down lots of small fermentations and using different yeast to steer flavors and aromas in different directions so that each tank is a little bit unique from the other. And then when we blend it back, we can get a particularly complex profile. I think of it as like, if we were just picking for a few big vineyards with a few similar types of yeast that steer flavors and aromas in the same sort of way, you kind of have a quartet. And I like to think when you break down, like we'll take a single vineyard, pick it 3 times and use 3 different types of yeast. And then when we blend it back, with all the others doing kind of similarly, we build more of this symphony. We've been working really hard on trying to broaden the mid palate to have a bit more depth. We've been doing a lot of lee stirring and a lot of solids fermentation, which is a super geeky thing, and I won't bore you. But rosé can be a really simple, refreshing wine, sort of as Scott was saying. I think For a lot of people, that's the impression. And yet it can also be quite dynamic and can have quite a lot to say. My fantasy is to have a wine that whose flavors and aromas are so tightly knit together that it makes it really challenging to write a tasting note, because one thing leads to another, which leads to the next. So certainly, I mean, if anybody's tasting it tonight, of course, this is the wine right here. I think it leads with kind of a peachy apricot raspberry element, then it kind of moves. Bruce used the word garrigue. You tend to, you know, in Provence, you can't avoid it. There's rosemary and thyme planted all around it, well, planted, growing wild in all of the vineyards, and it very much is absorbed into the grapes and presents in the wine itself. So yeah, there's a lot of rosé out there, and I think a lot of it is just sort of lifestyle driven. And there are a few people who've been working at it a long time, trying to really make a unique profile and something that's unusually complex. Scott, I'll turn it back to you unless there's anything else.
All right, thank you. And Charles, enjoy your evening. His daughter's turning, I think I heard 8. I thought it was 7 initially, but he's got a bunch, well, not a lot in COVID, but he's got a house full of birthday party to take care of. So Charles, thanks for your time.
Yep, sure. Thank you, Scott.
Yep, no worries. And then Bruce, we'll lane it right back to you with the left bank red, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, thank you, Scott. And thank you, Charles. I have listened to Charles talk a dozen times over the past few years, and I could sit and listen to him talk about his wines all day. I hope you felt the same way. Passion like that is not something you encounter frequently. And the fact that Charles brings to it the knowledge of growing grapes and making wine in America and growing grapes and making wine in France makes him uniquely qualified to talk with that degree of passion.
Thank you, Bruce.
The other term that, or another term that I learned to work with often when I was involved in the French wine importing business is the word terroir. And to a French winemaker, terroir means many things. We think initially that it means strictly the soil, but it's much more than that. Terroir is soil, certainly, but it's also exposure, it's wind, it's sunshine, it's the configuration of the vine rows. Everything that involves a vineyard's development is in some way or another ultimately going to involve a flavor component or some of the flavor components in the finished wine. And this is a wine that we started making in 2010, and we called it the Left Bank Red. And we came up with that name simply because we had to develop a name that was non-specifically related to the grape variety involved. The reason for that is that, as you can see on this slide, it's a blend of both Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. And we don't have enough of either of those two grapes to refer to it as either Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot. The wine is made from grapes grown in 2 different vineyards, and the vineyards have in common an important characteristic in the subsoil, and that characteristic is gravel. The gravel has been brought down from a nearby mountain over the last million years, believe it or not, through a creek. And it's what we call locally a blue line stream, meaning that it has water in it almost all year. And the blue line streams in Northern California that are scattered throughout the Napa Valley tend to be some of the oldest water supplies in California. We hired a geologist to come in and give us some soil analyses soon after my wife and I bought this property in 1984. And the geologist was almost humored by it. He said, "You're going to run into a very deep gravel deposit here. The gravel might be as much as 50 feet deep." It turned out to be 62 feet deep. But the gravel deposit is a result of 1 million years of water coming down from that nearby mountain and bringing with it gravel from the mountain. And much of that gravel got caught in a natural oxbow as the creek flows through our property. Well, what we found is that we've got Cabernet Sauvignon planted on this property in 3 different locations. And we had Merlot planted on the property in 1 location. The Merlot was planted in soil that is very rich with that deep gravel deposit. And one of the Cabernet Sauvignon vineyards is very rich with that deep gravel deposit. We discovered to our pleasure that the wine that was made from the 2 different vineyards planted to the gravelly soil had a lot in common. And those common traits created a wine that we preferred to the 2 wines bottled separately as individual varietals. Since the bulk of the vineyards sit on the left bank of the creek as it flows through our property, we began years ago to refer to it as the left bank parcels, refer to them as the left bank parcels. And when we got around to bottling the wine as a blend, we decided to simply call it the Left Bank Red. This particular vintage that we're tasting today is the 2017. It's an equal blend. In 2017, we have almost exactly 50% each Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. In 2018, though, I believe the blend is 60% Cabernet Sauvignon and 40% Merlot. And it's going to change from year to year as a consequence of the characteristics of weather during the early part of the growing season when we have what we call flower set. And then during the growing season itself, when we have changes in crop levels that are based on variations in the weather. But the idea behind the wine remains the same. It's a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. And ironically, part of the reason that the Left Bank name fits so well is that there's a region in Bordeaux in and around the area called Saint-Julien in the Médoc that is made up of vineyards that sit as close as possible to the Gironde River. And that area is the most gravel-laden vineyard land in the Médoc. And as a result of that, many of the wines from Saint-Julien tend to be those that have the highest consistent percentages of both Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. Many wines from Saint-Julien, in fact, are indeed 50% of each of those 2 varieties, or occasionally 40% of each of those 2 with a little bit of Cabernet Franc or Petit Verdot or Malbec in the blend. We grow these grapes organically. The vineyard is certified organic and we farm it sustainably. The vines are now about a mix of 20 to 30 years old. The crop level is relatively even most years, but particularly as we've encountered drought conditions over the last 5 years, we've seen wider than normal swings in the crop level. The grapes are all harvested by hand. They're put through a device called a destemmer that removes the stems and pops the skins on some of the grapes. And then the grapes are pumped into a stainless steel tank where they ferment, again, naturally, relying only on the native wild yeast that is trapped on the skins of the grapes during the growing season. The wine does undergo a secondary or malolactic fermentation, as do all of our other wines. And again, we do not add anything. We make no additions to the wines that we make at Nyers. We rely simply on fresh grapes, and at the end of the fermentation process, we will make a small sulfur dioxide addition before bottling.
All right.
Okay, Scott?
Thanks, Bruce. Oh, there we go. A little technology glitch. I think I learned something new from you every time I'm near you. So thank you very much for that. This next gentleman is, I always say that, you know, when people come to Carroll Family Estates, you're part of the family. And like I said, I'm 27 years with the company, and I'm certainly not the long-standing employee. There's plenty have been here longer than I have. And McLean is working on his ninth harvest, and he kind of embodies what I really think makes Carroll magic. When I asked him what he liked about the region that he worked with and what he liked about Carroll, the first thing he said is and that he lives very near the vineyard that he works, but most importantly, the region that he works is it's a little bit more of the Wild West. The goal is not to necessarily follow the norms. It's to make the best wine that he can, no matter what the combination of grapes are. And he has the freedom with the winery to go out and do his own thing. His first vintage scored 91 points in the Spectator, and it just exploded for us. It's a small lot wine from a region that's very, got a lot of excitement going on right now. This is a wine that we've been very excited about. We're just on our second vintage. And McLean, if you would, please take us through what your passion is behind this one.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Scott. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And I feel humbled to be in the presence of Mark, Bruce, Derek, and Charles. I'm definitely feel like the new kid on the block regarding my place with the family and the company and the heritage brands. So today we'll be tasting the 2017 Iron and Sand Cabernet Sauvignon. So this is from the Paso Robles AVA. To kind of give you an idea about where Paso Robles is imagine California. We are about 200 miles north of Los Angeles and 200 miles south of San Francisco. And depending on what part of the AVA you're standing in, we could be about 20 miles from the Pacific Ocean or upwards of 50, 60 miles from the Pacific Ocean. So we have a range of microclimates within Paso Robles. There's 11 sub-AVAs. The fruit that I source for this Cabernet is coming from the San Miguel sub-AVA, as you see there, as well as the El Pomar District AVA. The San Miguel District is the Estrella River Ranch. We are looking at an elevation about 1,200 feet. It sees some crazy diurnal shifts. What I mean when I say diurnal shifts is the difference between morning and nighttime temperatures. So at the San Miguel District, you could be around 95 in the middle of the day and then see nighttime temperatures at 55. These differences help to really push through some ripening. It helps cook off, as I call it, the pyrazines that could come in Cabernet. So pyrazines are like bell pepper or jalapeno, things that you may find in cool weather cabs or cool weather Merlots or Carmenères. In Paso, our warm weather helps to really show the fruit that could be expressed from Cabernet. The Parish District, or the Parish Ranch, which is in the El Pomar District, that's about 15 miles south of San Miguel. That district is within line of sight of what we call the Templeton Gap. That is a little notch within the Santa Lucia Range that gives us direct access to the Pacific Ocean. So when the sun starts going down, especially this time of year during harvest, when I'm coming home from work, I'm driving south on the 101 and I look and you could see a fog bank rolling through the mountain range, and that fog is coming directly from the Pacific and it just filters right into the El Pomar District there. And that really helps to temper the climate and really give the fruit a chance to ripen slowly while not losing any of that great acidity that I want to show in this Cabernet. So the 2017 Cab is 89% Cab, 6% Petit Verdot, and 5% Petit Syrah. And kind of as Scott mentioned, the cool thing about Paso and the cool thing about working with and for Carroll Family Estates is I wasn't really given any rubric or anything that I had to stick to. basically I was told, hey, make something that tastes really good, that you're proud to stand behind, that people are really going to like, that says Paso. And this is what I came up with. So I didn't want to cover it up with any oak, though I am aging everything in neutral barrels, and I've slowly started to work in some new French oak into my barrel protocol. I want it first and foremost, the consumer and the person tasting this to put their nose in the glass and be like, holy smokes, that's a cab. And most of all, I want it to be, holy smokes, that's a Paso cab. So I'm looking for is that nice dark cherry, a little bit of a sugar plum or plum on it, the black currant, a little cedar. The Petit Verdot adds a little bit of that purple flower, like a violet lavender nose, and the Petit Syrah really helps to give it that dark color. The oak that I used, again, mostly French. There was a little bit of American worked in there and just a touch of a couple of new barrels, but I didn't want to cover it up. I wanted to frame the fruit and frame the terroir, as Bruce was talking about the left bank that he has up in Napa. I wanted to frame the terroir of the Estrella and El Pomar districts. There's so much different stuff that Paso has to offer. I wanted you all to be able to taste what you get from those two different AVAs there in Paso Robles. This was my first shot. As you can see, I got a 92 cellar selection from Wine Enthusiast. I'm really excited about the 2018. Its little brother wine, if you will, was recently scored a 90 in cellar selection, or sorry, 90 and Best Buy an Enthusiast for 2018. So I'm really excited to see what the 2018 is going to be offering, as the 2017 tasted so good. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the group, before I introduce this next gentleman, who's one of my favorite introductions, I can tell you, most of you on the tasting are probably, or at least thinking, it's a little strange that we would have concluded with a Pinot Noir, especially after a Cabernet. And I've been doing this for 32 years, and somewhere along the lines, I didn't quite know the science behind it, and I still don't know if I do. But what I found is, over time, if I tasted a Cabernet, or I tasted a Pinot Noir first, and then I tasted a Cabernet, the Cabernet never quite tasted the way I thought it did when I tasted it earlier in the day. And through learning through Bruce Nyers, he had a theory on it as well. And Bruce, I was just wondering if you could set the stage on why we're going to let Derek be the crescendo this evening.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. I appreciate the opportunity to do that. This goes back really to my early days with Kermit Lynch in the early 90s, when I began to work with Kermit, and I found myself traveling around the country, meeting with distributors that in many instances were not particularly knowledgeable about French wines. I was knowledgeable about them, but I wasn't particularly knowledgeable about Kermit's wines. I was learning about them in my travels, and I was getting ready to leave for a trip to Texas, where I was going to be tasting, among other things, a few wines from the 1990 vintage in Burgundy, which was a great year and of enormous interest to a lot of our customers. As I was getting ready to leave for the airport, Kermit took me aside and said, now be careful, make sure that you don't taste anything after the Burgundies. After the red Burgundies, nothing really tastes as good as we'd like it to. So taste the red Burgundies last. And I was puzzled by that. I'd never really thought about it as a technical issue. And when I returned from that trip, I went about researching it and ended up talking to one of our savviest red Burgundy producers, who not only was schooled in the United States, but was given a technical education as well, as being a particularly talented Burgundian winemaker. And I finally wrote him a direct letter and said, why is this? And he said, oh, it's relatively simple. Pinot Noir is a cold climate grape. And as a cold climate grape, it tends to have a particularly large amount of natural fruit acid in it. Well, that's easy to understand. All grapes have fruit acids in them. Pinot Noir just happens to have more than other red grapes. But now comes a little bit of chemistry. It's relatively basic chemistry, but chemistry nonetheless. And that is that during the fermentation process, those acids that are naturally in the Pinot Noir grape get converted by a chemical reaction to compounds that are called esters. What is an ester? Well, it's an aromatic gas. If you smell a banana, you can all characteristically identify the aroma of a banana. And that's due to an ester that's associated with a banana. When you smell a ripe peach, it has a strong characteristic odor, and it's due to a fruit ester that is characteristic to that peach. All fruits, guavas, lemons, pineapples, honeydew melons, have one or more, normally just one though, fruit esters that are characteristic of the aroma. Pinot Noir after fermentation has a disproportionately large number of esters in the wine. That's one of the reasons I think that Americans love Pinot Noir as much as they do. We've discovered Pinot Noir and fallen in love with it over the last 2 decades, largely because of the wonderful fruit aromas that exist in the wine. And those fruit aromas exist for a very straightforward scientific reason. They exist because the fruit acids are converted to fruit esters during the fermentation process. Those fruit esters, though, as pleasant as they are, as enjoyable as they are, they make it very difficult for other wines to taste good after you've drunk Pinot Noir. As a result of that, I learned my lesson from John Nicholas Mayo Camuset that when I drink Pinot Noir, I don't drink other table wines after Pinot Noir. Try it sometime. If you're drinking a bottle of Pinot Noir, open another wine that's not Pinot Noir, a Zinfandel, a Cabernet, a Syrah, and try that wine before you taste the Pinot Noir, then taste the Pinot Noir and try that wine again. You'll be amazed at how having tasted the Pinot Noir changes the flavor profile of the wine, and it doesn't change it for the better.
Thanks so much, Bruce. I would encourage everybody, if you're sitting down, there's a few of you together tonight after you taste Derek's wines, go back to one of your favorite reds earlier and see if the experiment holds. I want to introduce one of my favorite people. Derek Rolfe is one of the great American stories for me. He started this project in his garage with passion. He may tell you a little bit about the story of his aha moment with his father. But what I find with Derek is the pure expression of Pinot Noir. I always say he's always seems to be grappling for that almost energetic, crunchy red side of fruit when it comes to Pinot. And there's a sense of balance and there's a sense of truth to what he's doing and who he is. So I really, if you listen close, you're in for a treat on this final wine. Derek, you want to take us home?
Absolutely, Scott. And thank you, Scott, and thank you, Bruce, for the awesome introduction. And I'll try to live up to everything you just said. I probably don't have time to tell my whole story, but I will tell you a little bit of the backstory of Bravium, because I think it explains what I do and why I do it, which is vitally important. So I'm a first-generation winemaker. I didn't grow up in a winemaking family. Wine came to me later in life when I was working at a retail shop called Applejack outside Denver, Colorado. And, having these distributors and brokers and people come in, pour wines for us every day. So on a bad day, we'd taste 5 wines. On a good day, maybe more than 10. I got to know that some of the wines of the world in different varieties in different regions, and just made my head spin. And so I started traveling the world, and I went to Australia, I went to France, I went to Provence, where we were talking earlier, we were listening to Charles and Bruce talk about the Peyrots and their renowned domain Tempier. That was one of my favorite stops when I was in France. And it being a very small world, as we all know, and a very, very small wine world, you meet people. And one of the people I met in my very first trip to Napa Valley, went to high school with my dad, and his name was Bob Travers, and he was the proprietor up at Mayacamas Vineyards, where I know Bruce did some time in his early days in the world of wine as well. And I think Bruce might have worked in the vineyard and put in a good day's work before he earned his beer on the porch. And in my case, my dad took me up there, and Bob and his wife Noni greeted us and toured us in the winery. And next thing we knew, we were tasting 30-year-old Cabernet and 20-year-old Chardonnay, and he put on this vertical tasting for us that just blew my mind. And I asked him, I said, how are these wines so alive? To Scott's point, about the freshness and the vitality of amazing wines. And he said, acidity, in a word, acidity. And he started to explain wine chemistry to me, which didn't mean a whole lot to me. I was just selling wine in Colorado at the time. But it made me decide in that moment that I wanted to move back to California, where I was born and raised, and figure out a way to make wine. So that turned into me coming back to California and taking classes at Davis, and eventually making wine in my garage, like Scott teed up there. So after I did that for a few years, and I'd made Napa Cab, and I'd made Santa Lucia Highlands Syrah, and a bunch of other stuff, I decided that Pinot Noir was what really, truly fascinated me. And I founded Bravium in 2007. And Bravium is a Latin word that means gift. And it was meant to capture the essence of, the gifts of nature. The vineyard is really the critically important and most interesting aspect to what we're doing here. And when it comes to Pinot Noir, even small differences in what Bruce was describing as terroir, aspect, soil, sunlight, the presence of fog, the lack of fog, like Scott was talking about with the Mason Sauv Blancs. All these things are really, to me, exaggerated in Pinot Noir. So if there's a continuum, for certain varieties, Pinot Noir has a continuum that's really broad. You can get so many different wines depending on where you're growing the grapes and the vine material you're working with. So with that all as a prologue, I want to talk to you about this Anderson Valley 2017 Pinot Noir that you hopefully most all of you have in your glass right now. And this is an exciting wine for me because, as I mentioned, being a first generation winemaker, the trick was I had to seek out the best vineyard sources I could find, over the first 10, 15 years of my winemaking. And eventually I happened upon this amazing vineyard called Wiley Vineyard in what we call the deep end, or the most northwest corner of Anderson Valley. For those of you who have been in Napa or Sonoma before, if you continued north and west on Highway 128 for a couple hours, you would end up in this beautiful, bucolic valley called Anderson Valley up in Mendocino County. We're 9 miles to 26 miles from the coast. It's a transverse valley. It's open to the Pacific Ocean and the Navarro Rivershed. And Anderson Valley Wiley Vineyard, is in the coolest part of that valley. And what that means for us, the mean temperatures in that part of Anderson Valley are cooler than you'd find in Burgundy. And so the mean temperatures control the vine's metabolism. And the other aspects of ripening are driven by sunlight, heat, fog, lack thereof. And what's going on in that part of the valley is cool coastal, fog-laden days and really cool nights. And so it's a slow ripening process. In a warm year, like 2017 was relatively warm, we might pick the grapes in late September. In a cool year, we might be picking well into October. And with Pinot Noir, I think that's really important because for me, I like a Pinot Noir that's in that, not that alcohol is everything, but I like something that is 12.5 to 13.5% alcohol, that's balanced, that has crunchy red fruit, that's fresh and vital, like we were saying. So you taste this wine, I think you'll agree that it has that crunchy red fruit, raspberry, cherry, fresh fruit flavors. There's some spice, notes that come from the grapes and also the oak barrels that we use, some French and Hungarian, as you see on the slide here. In 2017, we used about 33% new oak. I've been dialing that down over the past few years. In the wines we made this year in 2020, we were closer to 25% new oak. So that's a number that's coming down. And we don't make a lot of this wine. I kind of glossed over the winemaking really quickly. Is a lot of what Charles said and Bruce said applies to my winemaking. We're utilizing, spontaneous fermentations and native yeast fermentations. The other thing that's important back to the vineyard is the gentleman who the vineyard is named after, Brad Wiley. He planted this vineyard back in 1972. Scott's been up to the vineyard with me and met Brad. He's a character. He spends 3 to 6 months out of the year in Kohala on the island of Hawaii, where I visited him last summer. And he's getting up there in years. And a few years back, after buying grapes from him and helping him graft portions of his vineyard, he passed the baton to me, and I now farm Wiley Vineyard. The vines that go into this wine are 30 to 50 years old. They were some of the first Pinot Noir vines that were planted in the Anderson Valley. Brad was a trailblazer, and his vineyard is the best site in the valley now to grow Pinot Noir, if you ask me, and just about anyone else that works up there. So it's a special place. Wiley Vineyard gets all the credit for those scores you see on the slide there, and I hope you're enjoying the wines.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Derek. Well done. Well, I guess this is the part of the show where I'm going to thank everyone. I want to start most importantly for all the guests who joined us this evening. It means a lot to us that you give us an opportunity to be in your living room, even though it's virtually. I can promise you there's not one of us from the Trent Carroll side that wouldn't rather be live in Hawaii doing this presentation, and hopefully one day we'll get a chance to do that. I want to thank Jason for that great introduction and getting this thing going and staying on top of it. Mark Nakamoto, Mark Milton, everybody's done so much to bring this home. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for all of the winemakers who made this happen, because no matter what I say, that you'll learn a lot more from them than anything I'm going to do for you. So with that, I believe I am passing this over quickly to Mark, and we're going to get to the final part of the presentation. Are we not, Mark?
Yeah, so I think, we're going to, part of our event was, the virtual raffle for those of you guys who have attended. And, we're definitely excited that you taking time on a Saturday afternoon and hopefully have learned a few new things and tried some wines that maybe might not have been on your shelf in the past. But, we really wanted to create an event that, we can really, follow up. I know it's not our normal chopsticks and wine, but, we, in our new world, we all know we need to pivot, adjust, and really come out of it as best as we can. So, thank you very much for everybody. We do have our raffle, and, Scott and Mark have been very generous. And, part of our raffle, you're going to be able to not only win one of our prizes on the raffle, but they've graciously offered a bottle of your choice, or what you've appreciated alongside of this with the raffle winners. So all the raffle winners, if you get in touch with myself or we're going to invite you to choose the bottle you like best, and we're going to add it to the raffle today. So, at this point, I'd love to bring Mai to help us with our virtual raffle.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Mai. I work for the Honolulu Japanese Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I take care of membership and some of...
No.
Did we lose Mai?
Well, she's going to be the most popular person in the night if we can get this figured out.
You're back. You're back, Mai, and you know, I know what the prizes are. I can't wait to get to number one. So
Am I back?
yes.
Okay,
There we
so
go.
the prizes, yes, the selection of the winners we're doing virtually. Everything is completely random. We have your names and a number associated, and the selection is going to be completely random. So we're going to start off with prize number 5. That's a $100 Floor Deck sales gift card. Floor Deck is has been a member of the Japanese Chamber since 1992. So we want to thank Sydney for his donation. And so this prize is going to number 430. Number 430 is Weston Kurisu. So Weston, I will be in touch with you regarding your prize. And with that, we go to our second prize. Prize number 4 is a Minamoto Kichon Assortment gift basket. It's valued at $250. Minamoto Kichon, they are a Japanese confectionery store, and they have a store here. I believe they have a store in Los Angeles, but they're mainly in Japan. And they have been a member with the Japanese Chamber since 2013. So we thank them for this donation. And this prize will go to number 626. And that is Caroline Witherspoon. So congratulations, Caroline. And then we have another gift basket from Minamoto Kichon. So prize number 3 is going to winner number 97. And 97 goes to Brent Hamasaki. So yay, congratulations, Brent. I will be in touch with everybody on how to pick up, when to pick up after this event. Okay, so the next prize, we have a 2010 Clifflead Vineyards Songbook Cabernet donated by Sydney Hamada. He's with Floor Deck. So we thank Sydney for his donation. And this bottle goes to number 325. So 325 is is John Tsukamoto. So congratulations, John. I'll be in touch with you. And for the grand prize, we have a 2-night ocean view accommodation with beach club access at the Moana Surfrider Hotel. This was generously donated by our chair, Jason Ito. Jason is with Kyoya Management Company, and they are also a member of the Japanese Chamber. They've been a member since 2008. So the winner for this prize goes to number 628. And that is again Caroline Witherspoon. So Caroline, I guess today is your day. Congratulations. We want to thank everybody for purchasing Lucky Draw tickets. We have sold 754 tickets. So thank you everybody for participating, and thank you for participating in this event today.
Yeah, thank you, Mai,
So
and
with that, I give it
congratulations.
back to Mark.
Yeah, to all of the winners. And today's event would not be possible without our committee. So I really want to thank our committee because it's to pivot in a way that we had to pivot is extraordinary in itself. But putting an event together, learning from some great experts is really awesome. And I do want to offer that, if you do have questions, the recording will be available for you. But, if you do have questions, we do have the winemakers here. You can use chat. They've been gracious enough because, they're spread around the country. So, some might be a little late at night for them, but, or they're really enjoying their wines right now. But, it's really great that we have the opportunity to learn directly from the source. So, I want to thank them. Thanks, Scott Stubbs and Mark for helping us, and Jason, of course, from Fujioka's that helped us really put this all together. One thing I do want to say, I appreciate all of our members and our guests joining us. We truly appreciate the time. And this is just a preview, right, of what might be coming up. I mean, we look forward to many and returning to the regular Chopsticks and Wine in the future. But till that point, we still do want to share with all of you, the great wines that are out there, the opportunities to learn, get together, bring the crowds together. So that is really our goal. Thank you, because we've had an opportunity to, help the Japanese Chamber really continue our mission of really members helping members, and also bringing all of us together so we experience new things and obviously in different ways. I do want to leave you with this, though. If you have questions, we'll send a presentation out. The winemakers are available. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer questions or emails, because I think that over time you might have questions that might come up, and you can't get it from a better source than the person who produces it.
Jason, if you get later questions, I will funnel those all back to the winemakers too.
Okay.
So I'm gonna send an email to you with everybody's email address, but we would love to follow up on anything that works for you and your guests.
Yeah, no, awesome. So, we'll get when the recording is completed and we get the emails, we'll have the chamber send it out to all of you so that as you get questions, we can definitely engage our experts to learn a little bit more. I do want to leave you with this, as I know we're taking up your Saturday afternoon. We do have, as a chamber, a couple events coming up that I do want to make sure I mention. For our Government Affairs Committee, we do have a public reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic and general election preview. Guest speaker Colin Moore is coming up. That's going to be on October 22nd. We have a speed networking event on the 28th of October. And then we have a couple of things in the works that I think you guys will be excited about. On November 21st, we have our first shop, create, and support. And it's a family-oriented event hosted, by Floridec, with one of our members, Kathy Tong, teaching us how we decorate, for the Christmas time. So I think please look for that flyer. And we have a couple others that are still in the works, but we're excited about. A virtual trivia night, potentially on November 2nd. An executive forum series featuring JL and ANA sometime in November. And to cap it all off, we're putting together a virtual beer workshop presented by Beer Lab in early December. So for all of you who love wines, this was your event. And now in the future, for the beer lovers, we have something coming for you. So I appreciate the time. Thank you to all that attended, and thank you very much to the winemakers, Scott Stubbs, Mark Milton, for taking time out of your day to teach us a little bit about wines and about your story.
Thank you very much, Mark. Have a great evening. Stay safe, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Scott, may we leave?
I think Scott already left. Bruce,
Before I go, Mark Nakamoto.
Yes.
I served in Korea for 13 months in 1969 and 70 in the Army. And one of the closest friends I made there was a man my age named Myron Nakamoto, who lived in Honolulu.
Oh, really? Myron Nakamoto.
And I stayed in touch with him for several years after that. And then around 1975 or so, contact was broken, and I've not been able to reach him since. I just thought it was worth taking a moment of your time and asking you if there was any connection between your Nakamoto family and Myron Nakamoto.
I need to do some research. It doesn't ring a bell right offhand, but so this is not to be brutal, but you know, Nakamoto's, there's 5,000 of us.
I understand.
But
well, like I say, I had to ask.
Yeah, no, I'll do some research though. You never know. You never know when you start to do those researches and stuff. But definitely appreciate your guys' time. It was awesome.
All right, thank you very much.
Awesome job.
I had a question from Gordon. Gordon, do you still have a question for me?
Was it Gordon?
Yes, it was.
Okay, Gordon, you're on.
What do you mean we're on?
I think the question, did he answer the question that was on the text?
Did you have a question?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
The Nyers left bank. What pairs best with the Nyers left bank wine?
Well, it's a Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. The good news is my wife, who's a professional chef, just walked into my office, and I'm going to get her involved.
That's awesome.
Barbara didn't take a second. She just looked at me and said, lamb chops.
Awesome. We love lamb.
Lamb chops. And here in California, the lamb is good, but we find it very difficult to actually run into a slaughterhouse that does it properly. New Zealand lamb is readily available here, but it's almost always frozen before it's sold. And we now rely on Colorado lamb. And we found through experience that the lamb from Colorado is the best that we can get. It's not available 24/7, but if you're careful and you work with the right store, you can find it. And we like to charcoal grill those little T-bone lamb chops.
Awesome, thank you.
So that's my suggestion. Thanks to Mrs. Nyers anyway.
Thank you, Mrs. Myers. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, We do, sorry, I have one more question about that Left Bank Red. Is it a wine that we should be aging, drinking right away, or what would be your preference or suggestion maybe?
Well, the wine that I'm drinking right now, the Left Bank Red that I'm drinking, is the 2016. And I find that if I hold on to it for a year to 2 years, that it softens just enough that I really like it, and it gains enough complexity that it increases the value of it substantially. So we tasted the 2017 tonight, and I would give that a year.
Perfect. Thank you for the question. That was in chat, so I just wanted to make sure that we answered it.
Okay.
Yeah, for those who are still on, I mean, is there other questions that you guys might have now that we have Bruce still on the phone? I think, Bruce, we might have some others. I just want to make sure that we answer whatever you guys may have questions about.
Sure.
Or,
I
go
don't
ahead.
have a place to go for another 30 minutes.
No.
Actually, I'm leaving this Zoom meeting and having a Zoom meeting with Wolfgang Puck and 200 diners at Spago in another 30 minutes. And we're going to taste the same two wines, the Carneros District Chardonnay and the Left Bank Red.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
So that's all you do is drink wine all day then? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, yeah. When I'm not drinking wine, I'm resting from drinking wine. So I do a lot of resting and a lot of wine drinking, Mark.
Very cool. Very cool.
Thanks for bringing that up in front of Brent. Pretty soon it'll be scattered all over the Trincaro family headquarters.
You're living the life I want to live.
I know, and it's a wonderful thing. I can't begin to tell you. Thanks for the organizing this, Brent, and for overseeing it. I am a great admirer of your technical prowess.
You know, Bruce, each time you talk about organic and sustainable, and sometimes I kind of mash those two up a little, and, you know, and I know they're different. You know, maybe kind of the 101 on organic versus sustainable, because it's terms.
Well, there's a real simple way to look at them. Organic is the absence of herbicides, pesticides, or other material that is by nature foreign to the vineyard. Some forms of fertilizer are not organic and would not qualify, if you use them, allow you to qualify as an organic business. Sustainability, though, is a little bit more interesting, and I've come to find a little bit more of long-term importance, because sustainability involves, through technical know-how, replacing what is taken out of the land every year in the course of growing a crop. Crops rely on elemental compounds, chemicals like nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus, potassium, zinc, boron. All those things are necessary to grow a crop, whether it's grapevines or corn. And at the end of the growing season, after you've harvested the grapes or harvested the corn, you have depleted a number of things from the soil in order to grow that crop. Sustainable farming, though, through the development of a series of concepts related to cover crops, allows you to replant a portion of that land, whether it's corn or grapevines, to a range of cover crops that eventually will replace what has been taken out. So we farm sustainably and organically, but they're two completely different processes. Both are going on all the time, but we have two completely different objectives there. That's a great question, and I'd love to talk with you about it more. We started farming organically about 20 years ago, and we started farming sustainably about 5 years after that. And I've since learned that the sustainable farming is, in the long term, far more important to the land.
Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah,
Thank you.
hey, Bruce, real fast. I do have one more question from the chat. Really, it says between Bavarian or left bank, and I know you're with the left bank side, but what would pair best? This person is asking about venison. So I'm not sure if you're familiar or you've.
I don't eat a lot of venison. I'm not a hunter, but I've eaten it. I like it, and it's something that if I was sitting at a table and someone offered it to me, I'd certainly eat it. And I think that the left bank red would be an excellent wine to serve with venison. Again, the trick with any red meat is to, I think, make sure that you don't overcook it. Red meat overcooked doesn't go well with anything. And the few times that I've had venison and really liked it, it's been because it's either been grilled very quickly and rare, or pan sauteed very quickly and underdone. And in that instance, I think it would actually go better with left bank red than with pure Cabernet. Venison's still a very, even though it's gamey, it's a very delicate gamey meat. And I think Cabernet Sauvignon has a tendency to overpower it.
Ah, very cool. Very cool.
Okay.
I see one person writing in the chat, but he said thank you. So let's call it a day so you can prepare for your next couple glasses of wine there. But no, we appreciate everybody for joining us. And I can see some of them having a big party. So I'm sure that they went through all 7 bottles. But anyway, thank you very much. We appreciate the time that you've taken helping us out and, you know, giving us a great experience.
All righty. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, everybody.